Middle-earth, Hogwarts, Westeros. These are fantasy worlds that have enraptured millions of viewers and that a lot of us hold dear to our hearts. And today, I'm going to be presenting world building in Westeros, which focuses on one of those fantasy realms. I'm actually Messner, and I'm here to talk to you about grammar. Fun. So, what is world building? Well, world building is, as defined from Yari Hirso, is the act of creating unique and believable settings in a work of literature. Which just sounds fairly simple, because anyone can craft Hogwarts, right? Well, it's not quite simple. Authors use this world building techniques to create believable settings. And because this is a really wide encompassing definition of world building, I'm going to focus in my own study on just 3 factors, which include setting, myths, and created languages, which we will see. But world building, while I did list J.K. Rowling's Hogwarts and Tolkien's Middle-earth, it's not new. It just was popularized by Tolkien because no one had ever seen a fantasy series boom quite like that. And world building has gone back to even Homer's The Odyssey, where he infused mythical elements with the geography of Greece. And it goes on through Gulliver's Travels. You see world building in Robinson Crusoe and H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, and then we also have what leads up to The Lord of the Rings and the popularity of world building. Now, world building is basically the idea of building worlds. And so there are different theories and ways that people thought, well, how did these people come to create these worlds? What propelled them? What inspired them? We have the first theory, which is the possible worlds theory. And it's the idea that all the worlds that you read about are just alternate versions of what could be. Basically, they use our world as a frame of reference to build off of. Next, we have the semiologist approach. And this is interesting because this was derived from Roland Barthes' studies, and what it basically meant was that we as readers create text worlds, which are just mental representations of the language you read. So this is a really important theory because it's emphasizing the power of language in creating just mental pictures or even these fantasy worlds. And finally, the last theory, which is what my study focuses on, is the functional grammar approach. And this was created by M.A.K. Halliday, and basically it really focuses on how grammar is actively and consciously used to create worlds. And it's not just authors just littering the pages with words just to hit word count, like Charles Dickens would. So, functional grammar analysis. As I mentioned, we're going to be just looking at 3 simple factors. One is the setting, and that's just the imagery being used in the prose. The next is mythology, and we're going to go to definition not of like a pantheon of gods, but more like the continuity of meanings. How does the author infuse myths and the transmission of knowledge in his world, so that we actually believe that there are myths and knowledge to be known? And then finally, created languages, which were really popularized through Tolkien, who created an abundance of Elvish languages. So what we have here is, real briefly, I'm going to give you the steps of how you would do such an analysis, and then I'll show you how I applied it to Game of Thrones. So I'm basically recycling the methodology used in Robin Ann Reed's Mythology and History, a stylistic analysis of The Lord of the Rings. And this is based off the work of Halliday. So what you're going to do with this is you're going to break your chosen passage down into different clauses. And this will let you look for marked or unmarked patterns, which sound complicated, but they're not. Basically, a marked pattern means it's a non-typical use of grammar. So you want to mark it because you want to look at it. Or you have an unmarked pattern, which is a typical use of grammar, so usually you don't want to look at them too closely. And the typical use of grammar just means the subject comes first in the clause. Anything where the subject is not first, it will be marked. And so in my own analysis for the unmarked patterns, I just underlined the subject. And then for my marked patterns, we'll see I capitalized the theme and then I bolded the subject. And so the passage I'm going to be showing you is from A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. It takes place in the 2nd book, The Clash of Kings. And it's when Daenerys Targaryen, one of his protagonists, enters the House of the Undying and tries to figure out these secrets and riddles that the warlocks of Karth are trying to give her. So it's a really interesting scene, and I wish I could have done the whole thing, but unfortunately this is very time consuming, so I cannot do that. But as we can see here, I numbered all the clauses that were in there, and the marked ones came out to 19 out of 31 total clauses. So he has a lot of passages that a lot of clauses we really want to look at. And you can see here how I set it up. And then we have these marked clauses that you just stop and now you have to analyze it. So what we have first is, I noticed that he has a lot of prepositions in his marked clauses, like beyond and upon. And these are interesting because they're indicating this movement of Daenerys through the House of Undying. Just like she's moving and touring through this house, we are too, as is the words through the structure. We have these prepositions, so they're inciting movement. Next we have coordinated conjunctions. And a lot of people don't think we should really look at coordinated conjunctions just because they're just really small words. But here I noticed that he uses them a lot. And it's interesting because these coordinated conjunctions seem to signify the rising and falling actions of the scene as she moves through the house. We can see up here in lines, if you can see, lines 4 and 5 where it has and, that's beginning the kind of action. She's walking to the action, which is her seeing this old man in a throne, and he's saying, "Let him be king over charred bones and cooked meat." And that's basically supposed to be her father, the Mad King, Aaron Targaryen, for anyone who knows the series. And then we also have more coordinated conjunctions down there in lines 15 and 16, but and. And it's actually her moving through different scenes. She's moving from the scene of her father to seeing the scene of her brother, Rhaegar, who's been dead for years. And finally, the last kind of quirk of his writing that I noticed in this particular passage are the noun phrases he used. And it's interesting because he mostly uses them down here in like lines 25 and lines 23. And he uses these noun phrases as a way to draw the reader's attention. No longer are we focusing on Dany. We are now focusing on Rhaegar and his son Aegon instead. And the fact that he really wants to emphasize Aegon and his role, because we're supposed to be led to believe that Aegon is part of some prophecy. He was the prince that was promised. So it's interesting how he uses noun phrases to emphasize we should really be thinking about that. And so there are two parts to this grammar analysis. We looked at the way these sentences were created. We looked at the clauses. Now we're going to focus on a process analysis, which is the second part. And this is very simple. Processes just mean verbs. And they're classified into 6 different categories. We have material, which is the process of doing, relational, the process of being, mental, which is sensing, verbal, the process of saying, behavioral, process of behaving, and existential, which is just the process of existing. And this gets a little iffy because you can categorize different verbs into multiple categories. But I tried to do my best, and if you're interested in which verbs I categorize, you're more than welcome to look at my thesis. But what I noticed in this particular passage is that most of the verbs are material verbs. And that's 26% of the verbs he's using in his clauses, which is interesting because the material verbs they're telling us what's going on. They're telling us what is in this House of the Undying. They're telling us what is she seeing, how are these people acting. So the verbs are also taking on this idea that they're touring, that we're seeing things. And also behavioral is the next highest with 19%, which is important because she's actually just walking around and seeing things, and those are very behavioral type kind of verbs. And so, I did this with 2 other passages, which you can also see in my thesis, and I did see a lot of similarities in his writing. He does use a lot of material verbs when he's actually trying to tour you through his imagery and his settings, which is interesting. But why is it interesting? Why do we care about grammar in Westeros? We care because it could easily be used as a future way of teaching grammar. The traditional way is ineffective. This could be brought into the classroom, and you have kids actually be engaging instead of just doing worksheets where they circle random prepositional phrases and then forget about it the next day. So I'll be taking questions at the end for anyone interested.